Hello everyone, good morning. This is Keerthi here. I work as a QA lead for Cognizant Softvision, and I head the COA team as well. And my total years of experience is around 10 plus years. And with Cognizant Softvision, it's about 2.5 years right now. So my major expertise is into automation. I've been working with various tools and technologies related to automation and been developing frameworks related to testing frameworks as well. So, and today my topic is about Taiko Gauge, a JS-based automation script framework and a tool, so which makes automation and the life of automation testers a way easier. So, without further delay, we will just go at it. And I'm just sharing my screen about the presentation as well. So here it is, like Taiko Gauge and JavaScript-based automation. So even before going into an presentation, I just want to quote two of my favorite quotes. Quality is never an accident. It is always the result of intelligent effort. So, and another thing is like, to an optimist, the glass is half full. To a pessimist, the glass is half empty. To a good tester, the glass is twice as big as it needs to be. So this is my favorite quotes when I started my career with testing. And I've been following this throughout my career as well. So even before going into that topic, Taiko Gauge with JS-based automation. So I just want to cover the basic step called as why we need to move on to JS-based automations. So of late, if you could see, like there are many JS-based automation tools and frameworks. This is mainly due to because the rise in development languages and the modern applications which are being single-page applications, and mostly they are developed using JS-based tools like Angular, React, and Vue.js, which are more dynamic in nature. And those dynamicity brings in challenge the automation testers as well, because it's way dynamic and it's asynchronous. Asynchronous means, like, we know, like um, the flow of the application is not synchronous, and it always when it, for example, in a single page application, it first loads the UI and then the functionality loads behind in the DOM. So these things made the automation be a bit challenging with the traditional tools like Selenium or QDB, whichever has been in the market for long years and revolving around automation for like a king. But when this dynamicity comes in, like, it was a challenge for even for Selenium, which is the leader of automation quite a decade now. So that's when these JS-based automation tools came in, like, because of their tendency to handle the dynamicity, as they are built out of Node.js library, and by inbuilt they are also like asynchronous. So that way, like, JS-based automation tools help in automating the JS-based applications or single-page applications in much better way and in a shorter time when compared to the traditional tools. So few of the tools which are available in the market and which is being widely used right now is like, well, WebDriver IO, Playwright.js, Cypress IO, Takio Gauge, Puppeteer, and Codesub.js. Among these, WebDriver IO and Playwright.js has some support for mobile automation using APM as well. So moving on to Taiko with Gauge. So introduction to Taiko. So you will be wondering, like, what Taiko is like. Taiko is, again, is just a free and open source automation tool built by, again, ThoughtWorks, the market leaders behind Selenium. And Taiko.js is already mentioned, like, it's a Node.js library, and it's an API as such, wherein we can plug and play with any of the runner tools like Gauge, BDD as well. And it mainly focuses on Chromium-based browsers. You know very well, like, right now, all the browsers are being Chromium-based, like Chrome, Edge, Opera, and there is an additional support for WebKit as well, which is used to automate Safari browsers as well. And the main thing about Taiko is, like, the test version in Taiko are highly readable and maintainable. So when it comes to automation, maintaining the automation scripts is a huge challenge, especially with Selenium. It will be like you have to develop a framework, and you have to maintain it with the pages and the relevant page classes and the test files. And if you are using a BDD, again, you will have to go ahead with an BDD feature file, step file. So the maintain, if your application is large enough, and for example, an e-commerce application like Amazon or Flipkart or Walmart for that matter, like, maintaining the pages, it will be taking a long space as well. And one more thing is, like, you will have to have a build tool for building the dependencies of Selenium libraries as well. So Taiko reduces all these steps, and that's why it's like highly readable and maintainable. I can show you in demo at the end of the presentation as well. And the main thing about Taiko is like the smart selectors, which makes the testing way easier and adapting to the changes in the structure of your web application. So for us, say like in the agile world, we'll not be able to know when the things will change and when we will have to replace the next path with an ID. And that's why single page applications are very dynamic. So Taiko has some smart selectors which will handle these changes very easily as well. And the main important thing about Taiko is like you need not use an ID, CSS, XPath for or even explicit weights, which we use way more in the Selenium scripts. So that even makes the script slower. So Taiko reduces all those things and using these smart selectors. And Gauge, what about Gauge is like? Gauge is nothing but similar to a BDD concept like Cucumber or JBA or Serenity. So only thing is like it is written in an acceptance test criteria, which makes the life easier for even the product owners and the business analysts to go through what has been written in the automation code, and anyone can run it whenever it is required. Some unique features of Gauge is like it's flexible and rich syntax based on Markdown. You know what Markdown is like? It's plain HTML code, like which has been in for ages or and it has some support for all the languages as well. Like if you take Java, Python, Ruby, etc. So and it has an extensive plugin supports when you are working with Visual Studio Code, and it even supports data-driven execution and external data sources. Like if you want to have a data source in CSV file or a JSON file, it very well supports without any third-party libraries. When, for example, if you have to have a JSON test data in your Selenium scripts, you will have to rely on some other libraries as well. So these Taiko Engage reduces these dependencies, and it has an inbuilt support for all these things. That's why it is very easier to maintain your test suites as well. Now coming to before even going to the features, like just wanted to go through the architecture of Selenium as well as Taiko Engage. So when it comes to Selenium architecture, we all know that it is based on the WebDriver wire protocol of JSON wire protocol. And you have the Selenium client library for different languages like Java, Python, Ruby, and C#. And after that, you have the browser drivers, which communicates with the browser as an interface. So when these things comes into picture, like we can see like how the maintainability of the test case goes on, like it's a huge maintenance as well. So when it comes to Taiko Engage, you're not going to use any of the browser drivers, or you're not going to use any client libraries for the specific languages. So since it has an inbuilt support and it's based on the Node.js libraries. So and when it comes to Taiko architecture, you can see it's very simple over here. It's just an Gauge CLI and runtime and the step definitions. And you have the Taiko which communicates with the browser as well. Now coming on to the features of Taiko Engage. Taiko, as I said earlier, it has some smart selectors as well, like using proximity selectors. So proximity selectors you can relate to the Selenium 4 version where you have the relative selectors, which is mentioned as to the left or to the right of something. So it doesn't mean like you need not use CSS or XPath. It even supports XPath and CSS, but more prominently, people using Taiko Gauge go for the proximity selectors, which is way easier to identify the elements and reduce the failures if their XPath is not available or it is hidden something kind of like. And the ability to handle the XSR and dynamic content, as I mentioned earlier, like in single page applications have the dynamic and content loading asynchronously. Taiko has the inbuilt capacity to handle those things, and request and response stubbing and mocking. So this thing comes in handy, like even when the development is not a complete, for say like if your UI is dependent on the API for some data. So we can use this request response stubbing and mocking mechanism to test it out even before the API is completely developed with this mock data. And it has an inbuilt wait mechanism. So not only like Taiko and Gauge, any JS-based automation tools or frameworks, they have an inbuilt waiting mechanism with a keyword called as await. So which asynchronously manages the flow of the application and the flow of the automation scripts as well. So, and the features of Gauge include like it uses a markdown language for writing spec files. So spec files are just relevant to it, relevant to your BDD feature files as well. And it has an interesting concept called as concepts for reusability of code. So that I can show you in the demo while I show it. And I inbuilt parallel execution. That is the most needed one. Like for example, if you want to run a parallel execution using Selenium, either you'll have to have a Selenium grid or you'll have to plug in with any of the continuous integration tools such as Jenkins, AWS, and you'll have to create separate nodes and hubs for that. Whereas in Gauge, it has an inbuilt parallel execution as well, and data store. Like data store is nothing but if you want to use a particular data from one of your test script and to the other test script, you can use this data store for which will store the data for the particular execution as such. And reusing the scenarios. Reusing the scenarios is nothing but when it comes to Selenium, we will be reusing the methods and functions which we have used in the which we have used as a common functions. But here we will be using the scenarios that I can explain while showing that code. And another thing is lazy execution. So lazy execution is nothing but when you want your scripts to be debugged in to see some errors or visual regression, you can use this lazy execution as well. So it has an inbuilt reporting feature as well. So when it comes to automation or reporting takes a major place and plays a major role as well. So when you have to go with Selenium or any other tools, you'll have to depend upon a third-party library like extent reports or Allure reports for your reporting structure. Whereas Gauge, it has an inbuilt reporting structure, which is very much flexible and look good looking as well. And we can easily read the reports as well. It has an inbuilt screenshot feature as well for failures cases. And these are the few important features of Taiko and Gauge. And the coding technique of Gauge. So it entirely differs from your normal Selenium Java coding or Selenium C# coding. So there are three major principles over here. One is the Agni principle, which states like you aren't going to need it. So it's nothing but you should not be adding a functionality unless it is deemed necessary. For example, like you have a login function which you have to reuse it in multiple test scripts. So once you add it once, we'll be using the common function for login, and we'll be calling it in the relevant test files, whichever you need it. So that's a similar way here. And the single responsibility principle. So here it states like every module or class file should have a responsibility over a single part of the functionality, and it should be entirely encapsulated by the class files. So I hope you can understand by the definition, like you'll be creating a number of classes and a number of methods for your Selenium scripts, but here the class files will be reduced, which will be using you'll be using it only once in your test file, and you'll be reusing it whenever it is required using the scenarios. And the open close principle. It's pretty simple, like the classes, modules, and functions should be open for extension, but close for modification. Nothing but like it's kind of no, you'll not be able to modify or edit the classes once it is fully completed. So, and coming to the flow of a typical Selenium framework with page object model, and just comparing both the page object model and the spec flow of Taiko and Gauge. When it comes to page object pattern, like it's just a simple page object model pattern where you will have the base class, common utils, page objects, actions, feature files, runner class, and step files. So these are self-explanatory. You have been in automation for ages now. So this is the typical flow of a Selenium page object model, where you can see like given the structure of the framework or the folder structure is quite huge. But when it comes to Taiko and Gauge, it's just simple. You just have to define your environment and the browser properties over there. And you have the specs where you can define the scenarios and concepts. And you will have the dynamic test data through tables and CSV. If you want, you can use JSONs as well. And you have the test step where you will have being the step definitions and the relevant page actions as well. So when you compare these two, like this flow itself is simple and it it's visible like the maintenance of the test scripts will be way easier with Taiko and Gauge when compared to a typical Selenium page object pattern. And coming to the Gauge versus Cucumber. So this is where we come in, like Gauge plays a major role, where Cucumber is a typical BDD framework which is being used widely right now. So once you're using Gauge, like it will be, this difference will show like how Gauge is way superior to Cucumber as well. So when it comes to testing multiple environments, Cucumber doesn't have a built-in feature as such, whereas Gauge has it. And it has an inbuilt feature to combine reusable logical groups of steps. That's what I mentioned in the beginning, called as concepts. So here you cannot combine two features and run it in a single step in Cucumber. So when it comes to the background steps and tear down step, it is available to all the levels, like whether it can be a specification or a step file or a feature file. So when it comes to Cucumber, it is available only at the feature level, where you can call the tear down on background steps. And it also, Gauge also provides a data-driven testing with inline tables and CSV files, whereas Cucumber, it just provides through inline tables. If you want to provide an external CSV file or Excel file, you will have to again write a piece of code using Java or the language which you are going to test it with. So whereas Gauge has an inbuilt support for that, you do not have to write any further lines of code. So, and parallel execution, as I mentioned earlier, without any plugin or without any support, Gauge supports and parallel execution. Whereas in Cucumber, or for that matter, like Selenium also requires an extra plugin or a Selenium grid to achieve that. So it has an inbuilt facility to show the runtime context data, which I mentioned as the data store, and Cucumber doesn't have that as well. So inbuilt facility to read data from an external file. That's what we mentioned, like CSV or a JSON file. But in Cucumber, you will have to write a piece of code again with Java or C# or Python, whichever code you are using. So it has an even inbuilt facility to start capturing screenshots in Gauge, but in Cucumber, you don't have any inbuilt feature as such as well. So when you compare these two, like we can see like Gauge is in superior advantage over Cucumber when it comes to an acceptance-driven test or a BDD test, which demands that particular framework to use in this project. And finally, coming to the browser tools comparison. So I just compare like few of the major tools which are being in use now. So one is like Selenium, WebDriver, IO, TestCafe, Cypress, Puppeteer, and Taiko. So I hope the slide is self-explanatory, where you can see like Taiko has a very good, excellent advantage over other tools. Only with the cross-browser support, it doesn't support most of the browsers because it's based on Chromium. So it supports all the browsers which are developed using Chromium as a backend. And number of languages to authors test, it was an initial version which was supporting only JavaScript and TypeScript. Right now we can use even Java and C# for writing Taiko test. So in that matter, like if you know like Selenium or Selenium with Java person, you can easily switch on to Taiko with Java itself. It's not necessary like you will have to learn JavaScript or TypeScript as well. So just moving on to the demo. So this is a typical folder structure of a Taiko Gauge. So wherein you have the environments, and as I said, it's a Node.js library wherein it converts into the node modules, which will have all the node modules to be used for the particular test automation. And it has an inbuilt support for logs, which will capture the logs of your test, and reports folder, which comes in handy. It's an inbuilt reporting structure as well. And the specs, where you will be writing your spec files. So these are your specs files, how we can write it. This is your spec heading, and this is your scenario heading. So the spec heading and scenario heading is differentiated by a double hash and a single hash. So this is how we will be writing a spec file using Gauge. So, and this is the table where you use to send send the test data for your scenarios. And if you could see the scenarios, right, it is self-explanatory and anyone can understand what is going on the background of the test. And as it is easily readable as well, and you can understand what are the test data being passed and what scenario is being tested in this particular specification as well. So, and this is a test data like where you can have as a CSV file, which is a command delimiter. And coming to the environment, so it has some default properties as well. Screenshot on failure, logs directory, gauge specs directory, CSV delimiter, allow multi-line step, allow scenario data table. So in order to enable your data table inline, you'll have to make it as true. If you make it as false, it won't be reading your inline tables in the specifications as well. So on screenshot on failure, like you can make it as true or false according to your need. On the logs, it will be capturing all the logs right from the start of your test to the end of the test. And it has support for browser properties as well. You can specify your browser right here. And it has an headless mode as well, which is set to false right now. Like if it is set to false, you very well know like it executes in the browser. If it is set to true, and it executes without the browser window open. And these are something there's default properties where you can set the test timeout, debug, and step implementation directories. Step implementation directories is nothing but your step files where you can write the number of steps which are required for your scenarios. So since you have a default timeout here, it eliminates the explicit wait concept as well. And so concepts are nothing but it's a group of logical scenarios clubbed together. So here, if you can see, right, I have a particular scenario to be tested. This is one scenario and this is another scenario, which I clubbed it into one. And for this, the step file is also going to be very less because these two already have a step file. So I'm not going to recall the step file. Just with the scenarios, you can see, right, it shows a reference over here. With this, the reference, it will take it and run the scripts. And coming to the step files, it's quite simple. Since I have used JS, I have used this ES5 version of JS JavaScript. So these are nothing but your normal imports which you use in Selenium as well. So whichever things you are going to use for the particular scenario, it will be highlighted, and whichever you're not using, it will not be highlighted as well. If you can see here, I have not used any XPath as CSS over here. And these are the things called as proximity selectors, to left off, to right off. And even for checkboxes, it has like, you not even find checkbox element as well. You can just use the keyword checkbox. And if it exists, just click on check. So whereas in Selenium, you will have to write an action class for hovering over elements. Here, just hover is another method where you can hover and directly hover over the elements and click on the particular elements as well. So whereas in Selenium, you will have to use the action classes, and from there you will have to write your scripts. So this eliminates the lines of codes as well. And when it comes to asserts also, like it is very well maintained using the exist functionality and the exact match. If the exact match is not matching, and it will return you false, and it will take you screenshot as well. So coming to the package.json, so package.json has all the dependencies and scripts which you need to run for your test. So all the dependencies are maintained in your package.json, which is similar to your pom.xml or in Maven. So you need not use an external build tool as well, like Maven, Ant, or Gradle, which we use for Selenium or other scripts. So the package.json takes care of everything in the form of node modules. You can just put in your dependencies whichever you need. So for the test purpose, I have used only Taiko, which is the latest version of Taiko. And Gauge, if we are using a Visual Studio Code, there is an inbuilt plugin for Gauge as well. And it can be easily integrated with your continuous integration tools as well. So for example, I have just integrated with Azure using a .yml file. It's pretty simple using Takio Gauge as well. So when you compare other JS-based framework tools, right, you have something called as configuration.js file where you will have to mention all these codes. So Taiko and Gauge eliminates that as well. You need not have a configuration file too. So everything is inbuilt, taken care of by Gauge and Taiko and the node modules and the node libraries of Taiko and Gauge. So in the interest of time, I'm just running the scripts in headless mode and will show you the report as well. So to run the specs, so if you give it as Gauge run specs, it will run all the specs which is in the spec folder. So it will be running in a sequential manner as well. So right now things are in headless mode because in the interest of time, I wanted to make it in headless. So for the demo purpose, I have just made one test case to pass, another two will be failing, just to show like how it takes a screenshot and how it validates the web page. So to give a more insight of concept while the test running, so concept is like you can see like it's a .cpt file. I have a login.cpt file and search product categories.cpt file. So what I'm going to do with the concept is like, it's just like two scenarios. I'm going to log in and I'm just going to search for a product with a specific product specification for which already there is an spec. So this is the spec file for the searching a product and selecting a product using specific conditions. And if you could see, like I just reused this function scenarios, and I'm not going to reuse any of the, if you could see this, I'm just running this particular I'm just going to run this particular step file for these concepts. So with this reference, it will pick up what are all the scenarios matched in the concept files. And once you run that concept file, it will automatically pick up all these values and run it. So if you could see here, I'm just searching for the product. I have not used any of the login scripts yet. So it will automatically fetch it from the already written step, and just integrating it into the scenario file using a concept. So if you could see, like here is the login and here is the search. I have written only this step file for searching and selecting a product, or not for the login. I am just reusing that scenario which I have already written it in the same concepts. So if you could see, like it will show how many references you have used for that particular scenario or a step. So it will show you like wherever I have used that particular scenario and specs. So by which you can easily reuse the scenarios as well instead of reusing the methods or functions, unlike in Selenium. So to show you the report. So, and this is the test data like which I passed it to CSV. I am just passing the path of the CSV file where the test data is located, and it will fetch it from the CSV file and it will run. So I'm just running it from here. So you can see here, right? It will be fetching the data from the CSV file, which I provided here, URL, user ID, and password and user. So you could see, right, it just took 11 seconds to run it in headless mode. Whereas in Selenium, if you have to run it, it almost takes 20 to 25 seconds for this small scenario to retrieve data from an external source and run it. So to show the report, so this is the report. We will be seeing it in a Gauge. It will have the test data like whichever you have used, and this tags as well. and it will show like which environment you have used, and the time and the file path, everything it will be showing. So in order to show you like for a failed test case, I can show you like so here I have clubbed two scenarios in which one will pass and another will fail, just to show you the report how it looks like when it's a failed scenario. So here in the stack trace itself, it shows like I'm just trying to switch to a tab with this particular window name. So, and it shows it's not found. So here you can see like login is passed, but search and select a product has been failed because it was not successfully able to navigate to the particular window. So the products has been searched, but here it shows like, so the only disadvantage when it running it in headless mode is right, it will capture the current screen instead of the browser screen, which is being rectified in the latest version of Taiko. So here you can see like clearly you can see why it has failed and what has been missed in your test script. So this is how like a Takio Gauge report looks like for a failure and successful scenario. So it will even show like for each step how much time it has took to execute it. So it comes in very handy like when you want to reduce the timing for your automation as well, or if you want to run regressions. So it will come in very handy like using this scenario files and test scripts. So also one more interesting thing in Taiko is like, I'll show you. So there is something called as focus. Focus is nothing but when you're typing in any of your keywords, right? Like in a text box. So it will focus on that particular element and make sure like your test scripts are entering the value in the right element. So there will be a focus screen over there, which will help you understand that. You can just run that as well. So it is easy to run and debug any of the Taiko test when compared to Selenium and other traditional tools. So when running in headless mode, it is way faster than any of the tools available. So when you want to compare the headless mode running, you can just compare it with Playwright or Puppet, which are mostly headless. So, yep. So, that's all about Taiko and Gauge and the demo.